All
Hi
right,
there.
welcome everybody to the Grand Reckoning. Pass over to Shiael.
Yes. So today we have my personal friend Khalil on. He is the head of the Agora initiative and a Palestinian Christian originally from Gaza who later moved to the West Bank and today is a very prominent activist for peace who you can see on all sorts of shows like Matt Gaetz, on Al Jazeera, BBC, and now, most excitingly, here on the Grand Reckoning, of course. Welcome to the show, Khalil.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So let's start a little bit with who you are, how you grew up, and how that came to affect your views on the conflict and on the world in general. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood in Gaza and how it shaped you?
Sure, yeah. So I was born and raised in a small Palestinian Christian family in Gaza City, that happened to be originally from Majdal, located in the southern part of Israel. So my family were refugees that were kicked out of their homes. Their private property was confiscated, as most of the Palestinians in 1948, over 750,000. This happened to them. So, you grow up, I grew up going to UNRWA school, a very specific school for refugees in Gaza. Everyone in my class is from a village or a city that doesn't exist anymore, 1948. So you grow up hearing about these stories at school, at your class. At the same time, I grew up during the time of the Second Intifada. So I've experienced the bombing for the first time when I was 6 years old. I remember it vividly. I've also lived through, the conflict between Hamas and Fatah, and the rise of Hamas to power. Lived through the 2008 war on Gaza, and then, decided that I can no longer live in Gaza. So I moved to the West Bank around 2009.
So everyone's talking about the UNRWA right now because Israel decided that it would be a good idea not only to outlaw them, but also to destroy their headquarters in Jerusalem in front of the cameras. And so the Israeli standard line is that they're basically a terrorist organization or an arm of a terrorist organization, and they raise the students who come through their doors to hate Israel and to become terrorists, essentially. Now, I do know that you did say in interviews in the past that you were raised to hate Israel, at least to some extent. So how much merit do you think there is to those arguments? What was growing up in a school like that like?
Sure, yeah. So to start with, I would say, of course you grow up to hate Israel and Palestine, because they're bombing you, the checkpoints are there, the occupation, what happened to your family in 1948, etc., would make you hate Israel. Of course, there's no way around it, but to hate Israel. The education system is not the main contributor to that at all, in my opinion. It's rather the other way around, because UNRWA all the time trying to moderate the curriculum and trying to moderate whatever is being taught, because it's an international organization under an international supervision, and therefore there is a lot of pressure from donors, from the US, from European Union, sometimes Arab countries as well. What I could say about the UNRWA school is that, I'm obviously very grateful for UNRWA, because it was due to their education that I am where I am right now. I went to their schools. I'm grateful to the teachers. I'm grateful to the institution. And a lot of refugees like myself are grateful for that. Now, the whole Israeli argument is that they're teaching hate is in my opinion, it's nonsense. But at the same time, it's not like, oh, they're teaching you to love Israel there, because these are refugee kids, right, that experience very traumatic things. And the teachers at UNRWA too are refugees. So of course they're going to talk negatively probably about their oppressor. That's just normal. That happens everywhere. That being said, I don't think that there is any systematic teaching about terrorism or about Hamas or any of these things. Now, I've seen also like the Israelis bringing up the fact that on October 7th, there were a few teachers that are UNRWA teachers that participated. I don't know if that is true or not. If it could be true, because, these are refugee teachers, and there is very high likelihood that among refugees, there are people who joined violent organizations or committed violent things. And not to mention that, Hamas have controlled Gaza for about 17 years completely. So it wouldn't be that hard for them to embed it among, UNRWA somewhere or another, because there is no authority to prevent that. Nonetheless, that's far from being systematic. That's far from being, UNRWA policy. And in every area of conflict, you will find, armed militias embedded among humanitarian workers. It just happens all the time in Africa and everywhere else, in Syria as well.
So what do you think about the charges, not only about the education, but also that they're involved in contact with Hamas, sheltering Hamas members, arms for Hamas, those sort of things? Israel has charged all of those things.
I think it's not true. That's not an UNRWA policy. It's not a systematic issue. That being said, Hamas have committed horrific acts before around UNRWA. For example, in 2014, UNRWA itself came with a statement that stated that under my school in Gaza, which is, the school that I went to, they found a tunnel. A military-used tunnel, and UNRWA itself, Israel didn't know about it. The UNRWA went on a statement, and I can send you the statement, and said, Hamas have built a tunnel under us, and that's illegal, etc. So no, Hamas is not, it's far from being innocent when it comes to these issues. And in the same way they built tunnels under UNRWA schools, for example, they built under hospital. I mean, Muhammad al-Sinwar was killed under the hospital, Al-Aqsa hospital. That is a government hospital, and it's despicable for them to do this. They build tunnels under houses without permissions, etc. So we have to be comfortable to talk about this comfortably, and at the same time recognize that the Israelis, most of the time when they claim things, it's lies. It's unfortunate, They've, for example, claimed that there were tunnels under Shifa Hospital, and it was completely made up story. There was zero tunnels under Shifa Hospital. There was no, hostages in Shifa hospitals. But in other cases, in other places, yes, Hamas have used these places for to commit, acts of war, and it's obviously illegal under international law, and it's condemnable.
Yeah, that really brings us to the most important question here regarding everything that's happened in Gaza in terms of moral responsibility. And I really like your take on it. It seems to me that on the one hand, Israel is responsible more than any other party for the suffering of the people in Gaza. But on the other hand, it's hard to imagine Israel launching attacks this devastating without the events of October 7th and without the continued attacks and use of infrastructure by Hamas, which has often been used as a pretext by Israel for all sorts of. Well, you gave the perfect example. Hamas uses one hospital, so Israel destroys every other hospital. So how do you view that symbiotic relationship between Hamas and Israel on these atrocities? Who's ultimately to blame, and what's the dynamic there?
It's very interesting, Shiael, because the conversation has gotten so toxic around these issues that you can't just bring up, any of these nuances or facts at all, right? If you say that Hamas is at fault at a certain point, people interpret it as like you're defending of Israel's crime or genocide, or say. And that's far from the truth, because the truth is, like, obviously Israel is responsible 100% for every single action they carry through. Like, you don't lose your agency if the other side provoke you in any way, right? Like that's your agency, and you are responsible for your conducts. And Israel has carried a full-fledged genocide. They're responsible for the actions they've took. That being said, there are two things here that we have to take to account when it comes to Hamas. They big time miscalculated in October 7th, even apart from the fact that they committed horrific war crimes against Israelis and all of that on October 7th. No, but just the fact that they even carried the attack and thought that they can get away with it and that they can get something out of it politically. That's a big miscalculation. Today, we have lost over 60% of Gaza. And I don't mean like lose as destruction. Destruction is much more than that. In territory, we're talking about like Hamas control over 40, and that situation is devastated, and we're literally negotiating over water and electricity and food, something that we didn't have to negotiate before. And then you tell me that that was strategic somehow or beneficial for the people of Gaza. So no, we need to look at that critically and say, no, Hamas is miscalculated big time. The occupation is still there, it's their fault, etc. You don't strip the occupier of their agency when you say Hamas is responsible for acting stupidly, and I would argue even selfishly, in the way they've acted here. The second thing, when it comes to the conduct of war, it's very obvious that Israel intention was genocide, and its intention was to wipe the Palestinians off for sure. That being said, you cannot deny from this war and previous wars that Hamas have used places that shouldn't use, such as certain hospitals, not all hospitals, but certain hospitals. I mean, the one example that we know for sure is Muhammad Sinwar was literally under Al-Aqsa Hospital. That's just like a known fact. They pulled the body from under the hospital, from under the hospital. Many leaders of Hamas and military members were killed at schools. So they were among the people who were sheltering, etc. All these conducts are selfish, are acts of, I think, in my opinion, violation of international law and need to be held accountable for. But also, there is all sort of nuance in international law, and I'm not an expert on this issue, about like whether they were combatants, whether they were fighting or not. For example, even if Sinwar was under the hospital, but he wasn't fighting, under international law, you can't just shoot him. Like you can't just shoot the hospital because there's Sinwar under if he's not fighting, unless he was conducting a military activity. So there is all sort of nuances there.
Now you've had a lot of personal losses during this genocide in Gaza, which we all believe is a genocide here. Yet you seem very rational and very open in your analysis. You don't seem to have a lot of anger when you're talking about it. I'm sure you often feel anger. How do you manage that? And how has your personal loss, and also tell us a little bit about it, if you don't mind, how has that shaped your view of the conflict and what has to be done in Gaza?
So I lost my father, was killed at the beginning of the genocide in 23, and then my sister was killed in 24. I'm definitely angry. I'm still grieving and I'm still shocked. It's still sometimes hard to believe that this happened, and it definitely fueled anger and frustration, and I have a very strong feelings about this whole thing. But when it comes to analyzing what needs to be done and what should have been done, etc., there is just no way but to be rational about it. If you want to, and the way I think of it, if you want to prevent the next, sister or father from being killed, you've got to be rational, and you've got to talk rationally about how do we get out of this mess that we are at to a place where both people can have the freedom and justice that they deserve. So that's how I approached that. And even before I lost my father and my sister, I lived in Gaza. I know that place very intimately. I know every street, I know every area, every hospital, every school there. And when the news come, it's very personal to me, because a lot of these people are my people, like people I actually know. Last time I was talking to one of my classmates, I asked him how many of my classmates are still alive, and he says, I don't know. A lot have been killed. So it's extremely hard. There was a point during the genocide, when every day I hear about the news of someone being killed. So I'm sure it affected me emotionally. I'm sure at some points I lost my temper and I lost my level-headed analysis. I'm sure I've tweeted something very mean because I'm angry. Like, it probably happens. I'm human. But overall, I try to take the view that when you analyze facts, when you deal with what should be done, you gotta be rational. Did I froze?
You're back now. No
Well,
worries.
you're back then.
And,
Dude,
and
I actually would hella agree with you on that, and I gotta say, truthfully, and this is just something because, like I said, for me, I've just had, my second kid when a lot of this stuff started really blowing up, and I'm seeing all these children going through all of this, and to me, it's just, I see my own kids' faces on a lot of these kids, and I just can't deal with it, and like I said, a lot of times it makes me angry, and I have to hold myself back because I think there's something really true about that. Like, this lashing out is exactly why we're in this cycle, and so having a little bit of strength to hold that back, I think really does help to try to work towards something that's going to actually be effective.
Yeah, and think of it like, as angry as you want to get and as far as you want to get in your anger, like, I think, like, what is the end goal? Like, what is your anger doing? And I'm not saying don't be angry. I am angry. We should be angry. It's horrific that that's happening. I just think don't make policy decisions, don't make suggestions based on anger, because if you do, you'll be like the Israelis, in the sense, like, after October 7th, this whole policy, like, oh, wipe them all off, right? Or whatever. They were acting probably out of like feeling for, revenge, or anger, frustration. Obviously, there is a logical component to it, but we all have our own, ideological commitment. So just be angry, whatever, but, like, think rationally about what's the end goal on whatever we're dealing with.
so, speaking of end goals, there's been so much talk and so much drama around this board of peace that's developing in Gaza. I've been talking to a lot of people in the activism space and the policy space, and no one knows how seriously to take it. No one knows how to try to work with these people or against these people. As someone who actually grew up in Gaza, what do you think of these efforts? How serious are they, and how should we handle them? How should we approach these efforts?
So there are two things happening at the same time. There's the Board of Peace, right? And then there is the Technocratic Committee, that is a bunch of Palestinian members from Gaza who are under the Board of Peace, supposed to govern Gaza. These people are good people. They seem like they're very pragmatic. Obviously, they're not activists, so you don't see any of them shouting, "Oh, it's a genocide" or whatever. They're not doing that, but they're part of the people. Some of them I know them personally. I grew up with them, and others, who were former BA ministers, etc. And they got the approval of everyone, including Hamas, to govern Gaza. So these are the people underneath the Board of Peace. And then you've got the Board of Peace, which at this point, I don't know what the hell is the Board of Peace. Like, what does it function like? And because it was supposed to be about Gaza, and now it has over 20 states joining, and more states, and it's becoming almost like the UN, right? And it's all under Donald J. Trump. So it's really confusing to what role the Board of Peace will play in Gaza. I know for a fact that the one person that will play a big role in Gaza within the Board of Peace is Mr. Nicholas Moldovi, who was the former UN, I don't know how they call it, I think representative to Palestine, or in Arabic, Mab'outh. He was Yeah, he was like the representative of the UN to Palestine and Israel, and he maintained a very good relationship with the Israelis, maintained a good relationship with Hamas and with the Palestinian Authority as well, and the Arab states. And it seems like he would be the point of contact between the Board of Peace and the committee that will be running Gaza.
And how are people in Gaza taking this establishment? Do they have any hope that it's going to make their lives better? Are they very...
There is a paradox. There is a paradox here that everyone I talk to in Gaza is feeling. On the one hand, they feel that this would hopefully help them in the short term, get the food in, open the border, start the reconstruction, etc. And the paradox, on the other hand, they're looking at this and they are saying, how in the war is this better than the situation on October 6, 2023? Right, so that's the paradox everyone has to deal with in Gaza. And they're asking the question, obviously, why have we went through all of this if the outcome is much worse than what we lived in before? So in a way, and I was talking to friends, and like everyone understands to a level that this has been a defeat for the national project. Those who are thinking rationally, at least, because we moved from a place where we're talking about self-determination and fighting for self-determination to a place we're talking about international trustship over Gaza just to lead for food and reconstruction. It's not even, there's notice in the Board of Peace thing and even the committee in Gaza, they don't mention a Palestinian state. They don't mention the Palestinian people, by the way, at all. And they talk about Gazans, they talk about, reconstruction, etc., all of which are very basics that, to an extent, despite the siege, existed before October 7th. So it's a huge loss from a big picture point of view, but it's a win from a small picture point of view because, people are starving and people are in tents and they want to see reconstruction and they're going to take whatever is there.
And do you think that this is going to be able to stop Israel from finishing what looked, at least to me, like a very purposeful policy of ethnic cleansing and genocide? Do you think that's sort of what looks to me like one of the best outcomes of this is that there'll be more sets of eyes, there'll be more oversight over what's happening in Gaza? Like, do you think that Israel can continue in its murderous policy with all this attention in Gaza from this?
I think it's going to slow it down, but not end it. Israel continues today to bomb and do whatever they want, but they can't just, go on full scale like they did before. With the genocide continuing in Gaza today, we can't, but notice that it has slowed down, right? We've had mass murder before. Now it's like sort of incremental murder that's happening. So we cannot really just say, oh, things is the same. As activists like to say all the time, well, yes, it is because the genocide continues, but it's not at the same time. You gotta be realistic about it. The other factor that will play here is the whole talk about disarmaments of Hamas. Trump 2 days ago just mentioned that Hamas has to disarm and Hamas has to give up its weapon, or other they will finish them or whatever. I don't know what that means anymore after 2 years. That would be a big factor. If Hamas refuses to hand its arms, Hamas will just continue to try to run the show behind the scenes. I think even with the Board of Peace involvement and the committee involved in Gaza, I think the Israelis will continue to bomb Gaza in a way or another.
And how do you feel that the Christian community in Gaza differs in its experience from the rest of the population of Gaza? There's definitely a narrative among supporters of Israel that Christians are treated very badly by Muslim Palestinians, and that Israel is sort of a protector of Christian communities. But yet, on the other hand, we've seen so many attacks on churches and so much death and destruction in Christian communities. You grew up Christian. How do you view that? How do you view the role of that community?
So definitely we're not treated better by Israel, and we don't differ in that experience. We're bombed. Actually, I did the math the other day. Um, the casualties, if you take it, the number, because the number of Christians is very small in Gaza, we had about 6% of the population, the Christians in Gaza, killed during the war. The number among Muslims, brothers and sisters, I think 3% or 4%, because they're obviously larger. Not like obviously the death on their, it's much more on the Muslim community, but like when you take the percentage of the population, so we're on the same level, if not more, in terms of being bombed, being subjected to oppression, etc. There is definitely no difference in the experience when it comes to the occupation. Obviously, in the West Bank, the settler terrorism doesn't distinguish between Muslims and Christians; it continues, etc. Now, obviously, in Gaza, living under Hamas rule, it has its own challenges on the national identity level, on what does it mean to be a citizen, etc. Because when you are under a group that claims to be Islamist and claims to represent the Palestinians and Islam at the same time, and to claim that the Palestinian identity itself is an Islamic identity, this alienate the Christians, alienate anyone who's not Muslim. So for sure, I felt alienated under Hamas. I felt like I don't belong, but I've always reminded myself that Hamas is, in my view, is an outlier to the Palestinian history and national identity, and not the other way around. The national history of the Palestinian movement has been much more in the secular side than on the Islamist side. But it's very interesting that those critiques come from Zionists, because Zionism is literally the same thing as Islamism, in the very sense that if you're not Jewish, you would feel the same way if you're in Israel, right? Like you would feel that the Star of David on the flag does not represent you because it's a religious symbol for Jews and I'm not Jewish, right? You're a Christian or whatever. So I find it ironic that this is the Zionist critique, when literally, I mean, in my view, Hamas and Zionism has much more in common when it comes to that particular problem than, for example, secular nationalist Palestinian parties.
Well, if you look at the history of relations between Israel and Hamas, they have so much of a symbiotic relationship of strengthening each other. Absolutely. That the more you look into the heritage of that, the more you understand that it's intentional. The two sides don't talk to each other directly, but they talk to each other indirectly through violence, strengthening each other. Well, what can you tell me about your feelings about that?
So, there's so many conspiracy theories, obviously, on the Palestinian side on Hamas being spies, literally, because they literally always play to the hand of Israel, right? Like, literally, if you look at the history, every time the Palestinians get closer to like gain something in negotiation, for example, or even in like public diplomacy or anything, Hamas goes and do something really stupid, right? So it is historical facts that, when Hamas was founded, even before Hamas was founded, when what's so-called the Islamic Association in Gaza, the Mujamma al-Islami, was founded in Gaza by Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, the founder of Hamas. The Israeli general who was responsible for occupying Gaza attended the opening, and he was the one who signed, obviously, the documents to allow it to happen, etc. And the Israeli logic was that by empowering the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza and in the West Bank, the Islamists, we will weaken the Palestinian National Liberation Organization. And, it's interesting because at that time, when the Muslim Brotherhood, who later became Hamas, were literally taking stands against attacks on the Israelis, etc. And they would say, their stance is that we are weak and we can't do that. We have to wait for to get stronger or whatever. And the Fatah people and the left people, BLFT and others, would look at Hamas and say, oh, they're spies. They are traitors. They're not participating as part of it. And these are stories that obviously you read it in books, but also like even my father told me about these stories because my father was more in the secular side, and he was telling me like that's how we looked at these people. And then in the 80s, during the first Intifada, Hamas declared itself a resistant movement and start the usage of armed resistance as well. And one has to question really, why did Hamas choose to? And at that time, Hamas was extremely unpopular, by the way. Like even in the 90s, even after they used armed resistance, they were polling less than 10% support of the population. Literally, no one liked them, except like the small group that they were. And one has to question, why did they move to armed resistance? Obviously, it was to gain more popularity and more support. They wanted the masses to support them. But they also saw an opportunity in the 80s to replace Fatah because, they left Beirut, the Fatah group, to Tunisia. And Hamas' calculation was that Fatah just died. It ended. By leaving Beirut, they are no longer exist and they wouldn't be able to carry through. That's one. The second theory is that they felt that, obviously Fatah at that time have declared the Palestinian state, the independent, although it's under occupation, but technically they recognize two-state solution, right? And the fact that two states, etc. And Hamas felt more threatened that two-state solution would be established. And the logic among Hamas leaders was that if a Palestinian secular state would be established, we will be in a similar situation to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt or Jordan. We wouldn't be able to rule. We wouldn't be able to have the freedom as Islamists. And they felt that violent resistance to the Israeli occupation will gain its support among Palestinians, and they would be able to replace Fatah. Obviously, they miscalculated because then Fatah returned and they found out really the hard way that Fatah is much stronger than they thought, and the secular movement is much stronger than they thought. But since then, Hamas have acted in a way to empower the Israeli right in Israel. And that's like, it's not even like, I always thought like, oh, that's just a theoretical thing. Hamas did it, but they didn't understand what they were doing, until I watched this interview with Musa Abu Marzouk in Arabic, where he literally said we were trying to get people elected in the 90s. Like he says it, that they were doing these things, like they were smart enough to know that they want to get people elected so the two-state solution fails. So they were doing it and still doing it in purpose. They want to harden the right in Israel so that a solution wouldn't be reached, because that's their view.
Yeah, I can tell you from the other side, I was a teenager during the Oslo process, and when there was widespread support for the Oslo process, even in Jerusalem, which is a much more conservative city where I grew up, it felt like the majority supported the Oslo process. Then we had those bus bombings in '96. We had bombings in Dizengoff Center. We had bombings in Jerusalem, and everything really switched. And the Oslo process never recovered from that. It wasn't just that Netanyahu was elected a few months later when Peres was ahead in the polls, but also public opinion turned permanently against the Oslo process. And regarding the symbiotic relationship, if you remember, right before the Hamas bombings, there was the Baruch Goldstein massacre in Hebron, which was either used as an excuse or a pretext or inspired. I don't know how to look at it. Those bombings. So you had the extreme opposition to the Oslo process working together, killing people, and Goldstein and people like Goldstein said that one of the things they wanted to do was inflame the Palestinians to commit terror attacks. So exactly like what you're saying about Abu Marzouk was exactly what Goldstein was trying to achieve. And we're seeing that was on. We're seeing the same thing today on a much larger scale.
And even not to go that back far in history, Shiael, I remember 2014. I was in the West Bank. I was studying at seminary in Bethlehem, and at that time, Barack Obama was really pushing for like two states negotiation, etc. PP was really feeling pressured. Also, like, John Kerry would visit Palestine, pressure Abbas to figure it out with Hamas. Abbas goes to Qatar, meet with Hamas leadership, and they agreed basically for reconciliation to lead toward negotiation of two states, etc. And one of the things Abbas was very clear with Hamas on no armed resistance. Like, and even he said, like, I know the quote, you know, no fucking armed resistance, right? Like, just no usage of weapon, etc. He was very firm about it. He comes back to Palestine. Things are looking okay. It's optimistic. The Americans are happy. Everyone is happy. The Israelis feel pressure that they have to negotiate. If the CPP in power, and then all of a sudden, 3 Israeli teenagers get kidnapped and killed in Gush Etzion. Teenagers, and Abbas loses his mind. Obviously his intelligence tell him it was Hamas who did it. At that time, we were like still skeptical who did it, etc. And he says, like, this is like he uses the word like, didn't we have enough taqiyya? Which is funny that he uses this word like in a meeting, and he's like, what the F, basically. And he calls them that's what he told them, like, didn't we have enough taqiyya? He was very angry, and they said, like, it's not us, etc. Anyway, search for a week for the bodies. They find the bodies, they're killed, and then it turns out it was a Hamas cell that is from Hebron that they did it. What did this do? It destroyed the peace and the conciliation between Hamas and Fatah, because Fatah had to step back because they can't look that bad in front of the Americans. Israel waged war on Gaza right after, because they assassinated a cell that was communicating whatever. Bibi was really happy because like the pressure he felt from Obama and the pressure he felt to negotiate was over. And you can like so many examples like that, to the extent that so many of my friends who are on my side, pragmatic, look at me many times and they say, like, are they spies? Like, are they really working with Mossad? I'm like, no, I don't think so, but they're really selfish. They're really selfish, and they're thinking of themselves more. And I think ultimately what Hamas wants, I don't know if Hamas really wants to liberate from the river to the sea as they claim. They claim to want that, and drive the Israelis out. That's their slogans. That's how they mobilize the public. But I personally think that they would be okay with 2-state solution, but one that Hamas controls fully. Like, they just want a full Hamas state, not a Palestinian state at all. And that's something that I completely oppose.
Regarding that goal, that's what Israeli intelligence believed before October 7th. So you're probably pretty familiar with these, what they call the conceptia, the security concept that Israel had before October 7th, which was that Hamas had been sort of civilized into being an organization that wanted to rule Gaza and probably also wanted to rule the West Bank, but one that seemed to favor its political power in a pragmatic sense over a wider liberation strategy. But now Israelis believe, Israeli intelligence believes, that wasn't true. Now they believe exactly the opposite of what you're saying or suspecting, which is that they were dead set on a messianic religious liberation of all of Palestine, and that's why they launched October 7th. Instead of solidifying their rule in Gaza, which Israel was helping them to do financially and politically, they made a gamble on all the territory and then lost everything. So how do you see the decision to launch October 7th in terms of what you just said?
I think there is mixed of both on Hamas leadership. I can tell you for a fact that it's a known for every Palestinian, and you can read Khalil Sayeg's paper on that, by the way. You've written a good paper in 2012, that majority of Hamas leaders believe that the end of Israel would be 2023, because that's a prophecy that Sheikh Bassam Jarrar have written in the 90s. Basically, he, based in numerical calculation of the Quran, he prophesied that the end of Hamas, of Israel, would be in 2023. And therefore, there is argument to be made about how many of Hamas leaders on the launching of October 7th really thought that this would trigger Arab countries and Muslim countries attacking and therefore bringing about the end of Israel. For sure, if you listen to like Muhammad Daif statement on October 7th, it's recorded to the public, that he expected an intifada in the West Bank. He expected the Palestinian Authority forces to just, disobey orders and join the fight. He expected Arabs to march from Egypt and and Jordan, not like the military, but Arabs triggering the military to be involved, etc. He was obviously expecting Hezbollah in Iran. So there was this messianic thinking of end days sort of fracture to happen. And that's an opinion according to the paper that Shaqiqi written, and also according to the most prominent think tank head in Palestine, who's super leftist, by the way, Hani al-Masri, is prominent among majority of Hamas leaders, that the end is coming. Now, the disagreements between these messianic people come, and like one group thought it's 23 based on the prophecy of Sheikh Bassam Jarrar, and the other group thinks it's 2027 based on the prophecy of Ahmad Yassin, because Ahmad Yassin's calculation of the numerical Quran says it's 27. So now that thinking is there. But there is another school within Hamas that tends to be more gradualist, are much more focused on the two-state solution. They want to get two states, but Hamas has to be the one in power. And the question of full liberation is not out of the question, by the way, for these people too. But it's not up to them. They'll have to wait and see how the geopolitical situation changes in general. And that's how it differs from Fatah, because Fatah, when they took the two-state solution approach, they took it after convention that the international order has been set in place, that Israel is a state and we can't do anything about it. We can't just remove Israel. Hamas still have this, I call it wet dreams of, that somehow things would change. It's unlikely that things would change. Who are the leaders today, what they think, how much of them are messianic, how much of them are not, I don't know. But I can tell you from experience, and I'm someone who've talked to, obviously I don't talk to Hamas, but when I was in Gaza, you're forced to talk to them. They're everywhere. I was arrested by them. I know them like intimately in a negative way. I can tell you that on the military wing, almost everyone I met has some sort of a messianic conviction.
That brings us to an interesting story. What was it like to be arrested by Hamas? What was that experience like, and how do Hamas treat the people of Gaza?
Terribly. They're extremely authoritarian.
Questions.
Yeah, I wasn't because of Christian. One time I was arrested for Christian stuff, but no, first time I was arrested by Hamas, I was like 14. It was 2018, and it was commemorating the death of Yasser Arafat. Fatah in November 2018. Fatah called for mass protest. Like we get together just to celebrate Yasser Arafat. So it was about like 700,000 people in this really huge park in Gaza. So we came together and we were celebrating. There was songs of Fatah, Palestinian songs, Palestinian flags everywhere. Hamas has closed the south and the north to prevent people from coming, the cars. People walked miles and miles to just come. It was a huge protest. And I think what happened, as we were like, shouting, Palestinian nationalists songs and other things, I think also like some people start shouting anti-Hamas slogans. And all of a sudden, Hamas's militias attacked and start shooting live ammunition at people at the protest, just from everywhere. And I got caught. I got kidnapped and beaten up by them. That was the first time. The second time, I was leaving school, and I had my white and black kufiya on my shoulders. And that time, Hamas had cracked down on kufiyas. They just didn't want to see it at all, because kufiyas, although it's a Palestinian symbol, at that time was associated with Fatah and secular nationalists, and Hamas didn't want to see anyone wearing them. That's why you see Abu Ubaidah wearing the Jordanian shmach, the pink one, not the Palestinian one, because that's in their association. Although now it changed, because Sinwar changed that, because Sinwar used the kufiya. He tried to unify the Palestinians. The first Hamas leader to really start pushing in that direction. But yeah, I got arrested and beaten up for that. The third time I was arrested, or no, I wasn't arrested. It was like a small, how do you call them? Like Hamas thugs or something, beat me up, dragged me to the mosque and beat me up there. It was because I argued with like some guy who at school, Hamas guy, who wanted to convert me to Islam, and I argued with him about like why I think Jesus is the last prophet, basically, and they considered that as blasphemy against Islam. because if you say that, therefore Prophet Muhammad is not a prophet, and I got dragged basically to that. So no, torture, it's terrible. I know a lot of people who were like, at that time, even at the protest, when they stop people protesting and stuff, they shoot them in their legs. They put your leg, they put the gun behind it and shoot you in the leg to make sure you can't walk after. And that's the kind of terror that they're inflicting onto people. And we see it in the last few weeks. It happens every week right now in Gaza. They shoot people in the legs, they terrify you, so you don't dare to come after them again.
So considering how awful Hamas is and how awfully they treat their people, do you support Fatah? And if so, how do you feel about all these charges about their corruption? And how do you feel about these charges that they work too closely with the Israelis, that they're stooges for them, essentially?
So it's hard to say I support Fatah. Historically, I was Fatah. I'm not going to deny it. As a kid, I had the Fatah flag on my home. I was very proud, Fatah until I was 16. And after 16, I start becoming like just disillusioned with all political parties. Then I went through a phase where I really believed in peace with Israel. I mean, I was very much close to like left-wing Zionist groups, talking to them all the time in the West Bank. And then now I'm disillusioned with that as well. I'm for peace, but I don't think, talking about peace will bring us to peace. But giving that the just, the two options we have is Fatah and Hamas, I would pick Fatah any day over Hamas, no question. Now, are they authoritarian? Yes. Are they corrupt? Yes. Are they as authoritarian as Hamas? No. Are they as corrupt as Hamas even? I don't know, but I probably know too, because Hamas stolen so much money in Gaza. Right now, as we're talking right now, Hamas is imposing extremely high taxes on people, even those who are on government land, putting their tents after their homes are destroyed. They're forcing them to pay money right now. So imagine you lost everything because of Hamas's stupidity, because you destroyed everything, and then you ask people who are in the tents to pay your rent. That's all things that the PA would never do, never dare to do. The other thing that, the conception that Fatah is more corrupt than Hamas comes from a very naive idea that people have a lot in Palestine, that, because they're secular and because they're, not religious, a lot of them don't even pray, some of them drink alcohol, etc. There is more association with corruption in the subconscious of Arab people and Muslim people, as opposed to like religious people. There is more idea of purity and something positive about them. So they assume they're not corrupt, but they're as corrupt as they are. Now, when it comes to working with Israel, to be honest, that's the least of my problems when it comes to Fatah. And I tell you why. Because from my point of view, at this point, and especially after Smotrich is in power, and especially after the what happened in October 7th in Gaza, etc., I came to a very harsh conclusion. And let me step back before that. In September 2023, I was invited by a major synagogue in partnership with the Israel Policy Forum here in Washington, D.C., to come and comment on 30 years since Oslo. And I told them I would be very harsh. You wouldn't like what I said. They said, come anyway. And I ripped down Oslo, basically. And there was like the two guys who worked in Oslo. There was Ray Omari on the Palestinian side, and there was Joel Singer, the lawyer who worked with Rabin on that. And I basically said it's a terrible agreement. And look at what's happening in Hawara at that time. There was the pogrom. Look at all the killing that's happening, etc. And Oslo left the Palestinians defenseless. And they asked me, what do you think your solution? And I said, we need to just basically bring down the Palestinian Authority. We have to dismantle the Palestinian Authority and start an intifada in the West Bank to lead towards something real. Let's start intifada. Right now, I think how stupid I was to think that, because have we done that, we would have in Gaza, in the West Bank, what we had in Gaza. Ethnic cleansing. Most likely Jordan wouldn't be able to hold the borders like Egypt, and would have millions of Palestinians in Jordan. So why I mentioned that in connection to your question, because when we say about the coordination with Israel, insecurity matters in the West Bank, as ugly as it is, and I hate it, obviously, that we have to coordinate with our occupier, basically. We're the only people in the world who are asked to protect our occupier. This is also protecting us from the Israeli violence, because by preventing any attack on Israelis that can trigger war we are protecting ourselves from a very bad scenario, because you have someone in government, Mr. Smotrich, who've written in 2017 in his what's so-called decisive plan that we need any major attack or an intifada from the West Bank so we can carry out our own ethnic cleansing. He says it. It's not secret. So I think for the first time, I am rather convinced that the PA, with all its flaws, is handling the most delicate job and difficult job, maintaining that the Palestinians don't go to the route of Gaza. Because if anyone who knows the West Bank and knows Gaza understand that if what happened in Gaza happened in the West Bank, it's game over. Especially that Jordan is not Egypt. Egypt was able to say no and close its borders, and the Israelis wouldn't dare to do anything. I don't think Jordan can do that. I just don't. And it's a very large border.
So considering that you think that the PA is playing a relatively beneficial role, how likely is their long-term survival between the fact that Abbas is aging? People have been saying he's on the verge of death for a long time. So, and between the fact that Israel is starving it of funds and the lack of popularity and support among the population for various reasons, corruption, support of Israel, etc. What are its long-term prospects of survival even?
It's actually a miracle that it's still surviving, right? Like when you look at all the numbers and everything that Israel has done to them to weaken them, but that's I think also like what's really funny to me about this whole leftist here that think the PA is the traitors, they're the worst thing that happened to the Palestinians. And I'm like, don't you look like Israel is doing everything to weaken the PA, doing everything it can to empower Hamas, and you side with Hamas. It's like, yeah, maybe you're siding with the Zionists without understanding. The thing is about the PA, it's a miracle that they survived. I think obviously the Saudis and other Arab countries played a major role in the fact that they survived. We're not getting the tax money that are rights for the Palestinian people. Israel is stealing them. The Saudis fueled money in their behalf. What's happening right now, as you said, Abbas is so old and he's really diminishing. Hussein al-Sheikh is the vice president who is really in charge right now. Hussein al-Sheikh is the least popular politician in Palestine, literally very corrupt, not liked, lacks charisma, etc. But he's very pragmatic and knows how to work with the Israelis and with the American side as well, with the Saudis and the Arabs. So the situation looks very bad in that regard. And you know what Israel does? There is two schools of thoughts in the Israel right now. There is when it comes to the PA, there's Smotrich who wants to pressure for the PA to collapse and intifada to happen and ethnic cleansing to happen. And there is the other school that is more, Bennett and Netanyahu maybe to an extent, that wants the PA just as it is, doesn't have enough legitimacy, weaken it always, but keep it. Weaken it, but keep it, because this prevent them. Like every time they say Palestinian state, you say, look, they're very weak. The Israelis are always good at making these arguments. Look, if you read Micha Goodman and Catch 72, look, the PA is very weak. The Iranians militias will come, and they make all these, sort of philosophical arguments on why Palestinians don't deserve rights, basically. And there is, so these are the two schools that exist today, and probably they will continue to go in the Naftali / Netanyahu's, keep the PA weak, etc. But what the Israelis are very frustrated from the PA, that although the PA is weak, although it's at the edge of collapsing, they're still succeeding internationally, gaining international recognition from Spain, France, the others. This is driving crazy. Even today, there is talk that Trump will invite them to the Board of Peace, and the Israel said absolutely no. But it seems like Trump is considering that, and they're the French and the Spanish are pressuring Trump to do that. So how the PA survive? In my opinion, obviously we need to, the board need to pressure Israel to allow the PA to function, the money, etc. That is the right of the Palestinian people, and I think with a new Israeli government, maybe it's more possible. The other thing, we need a renewal of leadership on the Palestinian Authority level. And all the eyes looks at Marwan Barghouti, who's in prison, and he's very unlikely to be released. It's brutal for me to say it, but it's very unlikely for him to be released. If he's released and I've been advocating for a while and saying that President Trump, if he wants peace between Palestinians and Israelis, should make it his priority to release Marwan Barghouti. That's the guy who can unite the PA. That's the guy who also would defeat Hamas in the election easily. Like there is no even competition with him. And that's a guy of a two states and peace, etc. Like he says it. That's his views. Even when he was for armed resistance, he always said that I would only target military targets, not civilians. Although I know the Israeli view on him is very different. And if Marwan is not released, I think our best case scenario would be is to get Marwan to endorse a candidate and say like, this is basically my guy. And for this person to win an election and unite the Palestinian Authority and empower it. That's the solution. It's depressing, I know.
I like it. I think that's actually not too horrible of a solution because, like I said, and you're completely right. It doesn't matter who you talk to, from the most like right wing, like we have to kill everybody and destroy Israel, to the like, hey, maybe we need a two-state solution. Every one of them will be like, nah, Marwan Barghouti, he's the guy. We gotta release him. He's the guy that should be leading us. So that is the one thing that I ever see Palestinians seem to agree on, and it's kind of interesting.
And I think he gained a lot of symbolism because, the time he was arrested during the Second Intifada, he was very popular. Arafat spoke about him very positively. He is sentenced to long years of prison, and generally the prisoners have a certain, reverence in Palestinian society for their sacrifices, etc. So there are a lot of factors for why he is the right person.
Can we get into that? Because that's a little bit ancient history for a lot of people that are now following this conflict. So, what exactly is the story of Marwan Barghouti? How did he become a big figure, and how did he gain so much traction from basically like universal all circuits?
So basically, Marwan, during the Second Intifada, early 2000s, when it happened, he was an organizer of popular resistance, not armed resistance, but popular resistance generally. And his claim to fame, even before that, in the 90s, was trying to organize Fatah to be institutionalized party. Fatah never became institutionalized party in the same way Hamas is. Hamas, although it's a movement and resistance, etc., it's a very defined and institutionalized party. Marwan wanted to do the same thing for Fatah. He was working hard in the West Bank to do this because Fatah has been always this really large movement with a lot of followers, much more than Hamas, but never institutionalized, never membership clear. Everyone is born Fatah kind of thing. That's the nature of the Palestinians. He tried to organize it, and then when the Second Intifada happened and the peace talks failed, Marwan's view of the world was, and that's something you can read about it at Sarim Saib's book, Once Upon a Country, is that, and he was a student, master's student at Perzet, and Sari was his teacher, his professor. His view is that we have to do as much armed resistance against the occupation in the West Bank to push them out of the West Bank. Like, the more we hit, he said, and he organized cells for Fatah, etc. But his argument is that it was only against the West Bank, not proper Israel, and only against the military, although I'm not sure of all the details. The more we hit, the more the Israelis will feel the cost, and therefore they will negotiate the better deals to two states. And then he gets arrested by the Israelis and sentenced for life, I think 3 or 4 lives in prison, just forever.
Now, before we go, because your time is precious. Do you still believe in the two-state solution today? Because I increasingly see the two-state solution as a mask that Israel uses in order to completely destroy the Palestinian people. Something that they hold out while building settlements and making it absolutely impossible to come to fruition. do you still believe that it's viable? And considering that Israel's using these tactics regarding the two-state solution, how do we handle that?
I would say that you're a little bit late to the realization that this is what Israel is doing, because this is what Israel used to do. They don't do it anymore. They don't believe in two-state solution anymore. They are saying it. We don't want a Palestinian state. After October 7th, there is unity in Israel that they don't want two-state solution. So yeah, up until before October 7th, the Israeli argument was, oh, we want two-state solution, but the Palestinians are not ready, and therefore we have to expand settlements, etc., to like negotiate in the future, sort of thinking. Right now, they're just saying we reject two-state solution outright, and many of them even say we reject the existence of the Palestinian people outright, right? And then when you try to talk about two-state solution, the answer from their end is complete rejection, with some exception on the left, that they would say, okay, but the Palestinians have to be ready, etc. In my opinion, the question whether the solution is two-state solution or one-state solution is not important, because if there is will on the Israeli side, we would have a solution, whether it's a two-state, one-state, or even a confederation or federation. There is many creative solutions out there to solve this sort of struggles and conflicts. What occupy my mind more is what is a solution that on papers looks good, that the Palestinians are abiding by, and the Palestinians, majority of them agree to on papers, and that Israel reject. It's the two-state solution. And therefore, I'm still advocate for two states, because I think that's also the best way to delegitimize all the Israeli and Zionist arguments against the Palestinians, that we are rejectionist. It's not true. We accept two-state solution. That we want to drive the Israelis out of the land. It's not true. We accept the state of Israel. We did it in the 90s. We signed the documents that the PLO did. And it's that, we want to end the nature of the Jewish state by recognizing Israel. We technically accept that it's a Jewish state, although we don't say, oh, the Jewish state, but it's implemented there. So I think, strategically speaking, regardless of whether two states or one state is the most likely outcome to happen tomorrow, it's better to undermine the Israeli narrative and our argument. It's better to swing the public opinion to in the world. That's one. The second thing, there seems to be still international consensus on the two-state solution. Even from the countries who are the most pro-Palestine, like Spain today, for example, or Ireland, right? The support for the Palestinian emancipation and liberation comes on forms of two-state solution. Because obviously there is a reason for that for them, because it's the least messy, it's the easier to argue for, and it can, like, the Israelis can't argue that two-state solution somehow the dismantling of Israel or the destruction of the Jewish people, etc. And that's, I think, why it's important. Now, here's the thing, Shiael. I don't know when we will get to a point, because for years I was thinking to myself, there will be a point in the next few years where two-state solution is dead, which is actually, it's dead right now, and we will have to just stop talking about it. But okay, if you stop talking about it, then what? You talk about one state, but we know one state is not gonna happen. I hate to say it. Like, I personally think if one state happens, it will be a one-state apartheid with a significant numbers of Palestinians ethnic cleansed. Or even worse, if you think of it, if Israel succeeds with this whole board of peace right now happening, and like the committee in Gaza, to like turn Gaza to a successful non-state sort of weird territory where the Palestinians living there and somehow live of prosperity where, there is no security challenges anymore, I don't think in 10 years from now, if the Israeli, demographical number is increased, it wouldn't be impossible for them to make the entire West Bank just like East Jerusalem. Basically an exit, but not give them Israeli citizenship and just give them like Israeli residency. So that's more likely scenario. I mean, we have to be realistic that the most likely outcome is not going to be favorable to the Palestinians in some sort of weird scenario. One-state scenario, I don't think Israel is going to be dismantled. The two ways Israel could be turned to a one-state solution is, it has to be military defeat for Israel, which is unlikely. Or the second is that the US and the entire international community has to come and say and sanction and pressure to the max for one state reality solution. But if this is likely to happen, then the two-state solution is more likely to happen. Like the war that can't force Israel to have two-state solution, why would I think that it's likely to force Israel to one-state solution? That's my opinion. The other scenario, sorry, and I will end with that. The other scenario to lead to one-state solution would be the following: 1 million Palestinian and 1 million Israelis marching to the streets together and say, we love each other, we want to live together. Right? And it's very, very unlikely to happen. That the numbers of people who think this way in Israel is like less than 2%. If we get only like, even not 1 million, even if you get 400,000 to 500,000 Israelis, and at the same on the Palestinian side, marching in Tel Aviv and Ramallah saying we want one state solution, we can't live without the Palestinians, we can't live without the Israelis, I'll buy it.
Hard to imagine, but I would be there, and maybe you would be there too.
I'll be there too. Yeah. If I said, like, by nature I'm liberal, right? By nature I am proud of being Palestinian. I love the Palestinian flag. I feel all these things about it. But by nature I'm liberal. I can compromise to have a different flag and have a one liberal state. But what has been always interesting to me, that the people who are the most nationalist on the diaspora, obviously, and the farthest on the left, etc., the one that the most proud about Palestinian flag, etc., are also the ones who are supporting one state solution. And there is a contradiction here that I cannot resolve to myself unless you're really thinking that a one state solution would imply that the Israelis would leave. And I think that's the myth that a lot of people think. I was speaking at Raleigh last week, and one person came up to me and he said, since you believe all these bad things about Israel, why don't you just push for a one state solution? I said, sure, I'm not against it on theory, but what we're going to do about the Israelis? And he said, well, they will leave like in South Africa. I said, A, the South Africans didn't leave, like the white South Africans.
You're thinking of Rhodesia.
Yeah, and then P, the numbers are completely different there. And he said, no, they leave, etc. I said, like, Israelis are not leaving anywhere. So you have to come to this realization. Even if a one-state solution happens, Israelis are not leaving anywhere. If you believe that, if you really think that, then I think your entire thinking about that would change.
Absolutely. Israelis are not going anywhere. And I get attacked too, saying, well, you're a Zionist if you think that Jews should stay in Israel. The extremism there.
Everyone is a Zionist.
Yes.
Look at the history and see that, like, I mean, the whole idea of armed resistance in the first place is based on the whole Syria model. Was it Syria, right? But no, it was Algeria. I'm sorry. The Algerian model. But like I said, the reason you could get the French out of Algeria is because the French can go back to France. And the whole game with Israel was like, we're building a home. It's the same reason why America was not a successful push out by a lot of the natives, even though there were, incessant attacks from the Native Americans, because the people who were coming to the Americas were coming to build a new home. They weren't coming to, just have some colony to get some wealth and go home. So it's a little bit of a different project.
And it's like, I think that what people don't understand is that there is difference between settler colonialism and colonialism. Generally, colonialism is one country goes to another country and build colonies there. That is, France going to Algeria and building colonies there. Settler colonialism is a group of people going there from their country, disassociating themselves from whatever country they're there, and they're building a new identity. And that is the case of Israel. That's the case of the US. That's the case of Australia. And every pro-Palestine agree that it's settler colonialism, but they don't think of the implication as much. And I always tell people, if you think that Israelis are going to leave Israel, you can dream of that. Also, we have to leave the US consistently on the moral position, because technically I'm a settler here. As Rashid Khaldi said in right after October 7th in New Yorker interview with him, he said, he's a settler in the native land in his apartment in New York. No one has the right to come to your apartment in New York and kick you out, right? if an Indian American indigenous American show up to my apartment here in Washington, D.C. and ask me to leave right now, I'll be confused. But inside my mind, I would know for a fact that he sort of have the right morally, like thinking of it and rationally, but like not how the world work. I still need the apartment to like keep my family safe, right? So that's, I think, what we have to be thinking in that. No one is leaving anywhere. What we need is into the apartheid regime. What we need is equality for Palestinians and Israelis. What we need is peace in which, a Palestinian is not killed and Israel is not killed, but also in which, Israelis are not treated better than Palestinians, and that they are equal to the Palestinians, because that's the fundamental of what we believe as the humanity today. If you ask anyone everywhere, almost would tell you that people are equal no matter who they are.
Thank you so much. Is there any parting thoughts you want to leave with our viewers?
I think that's all. Thank you for having me. I hope your viewers enjoy it. Please, follow me on Twitter, and you can also find my organization at the agorainitiative.org. I hope you participate, subscribe to our newsletter, and thank you.
They're doing amazing things at the Agora Initiative.
Definitely. We'll put it all in the links as well underneath. But we definitely appreciate your time and you coming in and sitting with us. It's a fresh perspective whenever we can get a Christian from Gaza, because like I said, it's, as you said, it's not as common as Islam, but they definitely have a fresh perspective. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time to come and let us know what's going on from you guys' outlook.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Pleasure having you. Have a wonderful day.